Have you ever felt like you're giving everything to someone who gives you just enough to keep you hoping, but never enough to feel safe? Like you're trapped in an emotional dance where you're always reaching and they're always retreating? What if I told you that the real transformation doesn't begin when they finally turn around, but when you finally turn inward? When we enter relationships, especially with emotionally avoidant partners, we are often unaware that what binds us is not just love or attraction, but a deeper psychological phenomenon known as projection. The human psyche, in its complexity, does not always seek reality. It often seeks reflection. In avoidant partners, we may unconsciously find mirrors for wounds left unhealed from our past, especially from childhood. When someone pulls away, withholds affection, or fears intimacy, it awakens the very places inside us that long to be seen, chosen, and embraced. But rather than recognizing that this pain belongs to us, we externalize it. We believe that if only the avoidant would open up, we would feel whole. This is the essence of projection, placing our unmet emotional needs onto another and asking them to resolve what we have not yet resolved within ourselves. This projection acts as a veil, distorting our vision. We no longer see the avoidant partner as they are, but as a symbolic figure. Perhaps they represent the emotionally unavailable parent we tried so hard to please. Perhaps their aloofness echoes the silence of a caregiver who taught us love was conditional. And so, in this repetition, we attempt to rewrite the story. We chase, we fix, we prove ourselves, hoping that if this person finally chooses us, it will mean we were always worthy. But in doing so, we are not relating to them. We are relating to our past, reliving an emotional pattern we haven't yet made conscious. To detach emotionally, we must begin by withdrawing our projections. This requires inner honesty and the courage to look inward. Instead of asking, "Why are they like this?" we ask, "Why am I still drawn to this dynamic?" We acknowledge that the need for validation we are placing on the avoidant partner is actually a call from our inner child who was once neglected. By recognizing this, we take our power back. We stop trying to control or fix someone else and begin to tend to our own emotional wounds with compassion and presence. This process of withdrawing projections does not lead to bitterness or blame. Instead, it leads to clarity. We begin to see the avoidant for who they are, a person with their own fears, boundaries, and limitations. We no longer take their distance as a personal rejection, but as a reflection of where they are in their own journey. And more importantly, we begin to recognize the parts of ourselves we had disowned, the need for love, the fear of abandonment, the hunger for connection. By embracing these parts, we stop projecting them onto others. The relationship dynamic begins to shift, not necessarily because they change, but because we are no longer engaging from a place of unconscious need. We become aware, and in awareness, detachment becomes possible. The desire to merge with another is a primal impulse rooted deep within the psyche. It is the yearning to dissolve separateness, to feel that we are no longer alone in the vast uncertainty of existence. In relationships, especially with avoidant partners, this desire becomes intensified, not because the connection is deep, but because the gap between what is longed for and what is given creates tension. The more the avoidant withdraws, the more the emotionally attuned partner leans in, seeking union as a cure for inner fragmentation. This dynamic feeds a cycle where one chases closeness while the other flees from it, and the illusion is formed that, if only connection were achieved, the inner void would be filled. However, this yearning for fusion is not love in its mature form. It is dependency masquerading as intimacy. The self, when not fully individuated, clings to others to complete what it feels is missing. The avoidant partner becomes a symbol of wholeness, and so the emotional pursuit continues, not out of mutual understanding, but from the fear of separateness. This desire to be one with someone is not rooted in true connection, but in the unconscious belief that another person can fix our feelings of incompleteness. The avoidant, on the other hand, fears that closeness will dissolve their autonomy. Intimacy to them feels like suffocation, so they retreat, creating emotional space not out of cruelty, but as a defense against being overwhelmed or consumed. In this polarized dance, both partners are reacting to internal wounds. The one who clings often fears abandonment, believing their worth is affirmed only through another's presence. The one who withdraws fears engulfment, believing that closeness requires the loss of identity. True emotional detachment begins when we break this cycle by choosing individuation over fusion. Individuation is the process of becoming whole within ourselves, of integrating the fragmented parts of our personality and no longer outsourcing that task to someone else. When we begin to see ourselves not as half of a pair but as a complete individual, the energy previously directed outward is redirected inward. The chase stops, not because the avoidant partner suddenly gives in, but because the need to chase dissolves. We stop trying to earn love or prove our value. We stop trying to rescue or be rescued. The relationship is seen not as salvation, but as a mirror. If we are continually drawn to those who fear closeness, we must ask what we are avoiding within ourselves. Often, it is our own fear of being truly seen, our own discomfort with vulnerability, masked by the illusion that we are the emotionally available one. Choosing individuation is not abandonment of love. It is the foundation for real connection. It means we can love without clinging, care without losing ourselves, and walk away without destroying our sense of identity. In this state, we are no longer enslaved by the other's emotional availability, for our sense of self is no longer tethered to their ability to stay. Emotional detachment from an avoidant partner begins with the conscious withdrawal of excessive emotional investment. This does not imply becoming cold or indifferent, but rather choosing not to overextend the psyche into spaces where it is repeatedly left unseen or unvalued. An avoidant partner builds emotional walls, not always out of malice, but from deep unconscious fears of vulnerability and loss of control. Their instinct to maintain distance is their form of self-preservation, even if it causes distress to the one who craves connection. When faced with this pattern, the emotionally attuned partner often feels compelled to fill the space between them with effort, reassurance, and emotional labor. This investment can become an addiction, a desperate attempt to repair what was never theirs to fix. The tragedy lies in the hope that one's love, loyalty, or patience will unlock the avoidant's emotional fortress. The more emotional currency we spend trying to gain their presence, the more we deplete our own reserves. We offer our energy, attention, and time without reciprocity, mistaking their silence for depth or their detachment for mystery. In truth, what we are often responding to is not love, but the anxiety of inconsistency. The avoidant gives just enough to keep the connection alive, but never enough to allow it to deepen. The ambiguity binds us, not their affection. To emotionally detach, one must reclaim what has been given without consciousness. This requires slowing down and observing where the energy flows, how often thoughts orbit around them, how frequently emotions are dictated by their actions, and how much of our identity has been shaped in response to their reactivity. When we see clearly how much of ourselves we have handed over to the dynamics of avoidance, we begin the process of retrieval. This withdrawal is not punishment, it is restoration. We take our attention off them, not in anger, but to redirect it inward, where it was always needed. Healthy detachment respects the avoidant's emotional boundaries without taking responsibility for them. We stop decoding their silences or reading between the lines of their evasions. We no longer interpret every withdrawal as a test of our worth or loyalty. We stop performing for their affection or shrinking in hopes of being chosen. In detachment, we let the avoidant be exactly who they are without trying to change or rescue them. This clarity frees us from the illusion that our emotional labor can bridge the gap their own fear has created. By consciously withdrawing our emotional overinvestment, we create space for truth to emerge. If the connection cannot survive without our constant effort, it was not sustainable to begin with. And in this clarity, we regain the energy we had been scattering outward. We begin to invest in ourselves, not as a way to win them back, but as a path back to our center. Detachment becomes not a closing of the heart, but a refusal to abandon it for someone who fears to meet it. The emotional draw to an avoidant partner is not accidental. It is a magnetic pull from the unconscious, a force that brings us face to face with the very parts of ourselves we have long denied or disowned. The avoidant, in their silence and distance, does more than frustrate us. They reveal our shadow. This shadow is not evil or malicious. It is the repressed dimension of our psyche, the emotional truths we've buried because they were once unsafe or unwelcome. The pain of being emotionally neglected in a relationship echoes louder when our own sense of worth is shaky or unexamined. Their coldness triggers our fear of abandonment. Their emotional unavailability awakens our fear of inadequacy, and their detachment mirrors our inner disconnection from our deepest needs. We often view the avoidant as the one who needs healing, the one with walls and issues, but this narrative keeps us blind to our role in the dynamic. The attraction itself is a signal. It is our unconscious way of reenacting an old wound in the hope of achieving a different outcome. We subconsciously believe that if we can just make the avoidant stay, open up, or love us fully, we can rewrite history. Heal the child in us who is not emotionally met. But healing does not come through repetition. It comes through integration. The shadow cannot be escaped or projected onto others forever. Eventually, it demands to be acknowledged. The avoidant does not create our emotional wounds. They expose them, and that exposure is both painful and revelatory. To do shadow work is to stop blaming the avoidant and start asking, what do they reflect within me? Their avoidance may mirror our fear of being truly seen, our belief that we must earn love, or our deep-seated discomfort with being vulnerable. When we stop trying to fix or chase them and instead turn inward, we uncover the root of our emotional dependence. We realize that it was never really about them. It was about the parts of ourselves we abandoned long ago. Ownership of the shadow is liberation. It means no longer needing the avoidant to change in order for us to feel whole. It means recognizing that our compulsion to stay, to prove, to persist is not strength. It is a cry for self-recognition. As we confront our shadow, we retrieve the power we scattered across countless emotional transactions. We stop trying to find our reflection in someone who refuses to hold a mirror. We become the mirror for ourselves. In this work, detachment becomes inevitable, not because we stop caring, but because we stop abandoning ourselves. The avoidant partner no longer holds the keys to our healing. We see them clearly, perhaps even with compassion, but we no longer see them as the missing piece. The shadow has been integrated, the cycle interrupted. What once felt like love now reveals itself as a lesson, and in that revelation, freedom begins. Pain within a relationship is rarely meaningless. When we become entangled with an avoidant partner, the emotional anguish we experience is not just about their detachment. It is about what their behavior activates within us. That pain is a message from the deeper layers of the psyche, calling us to awaken, not collapse. The emotional wound that is left open by their distance and inconsistency is not just a hole. It is an opening, a portal to transformation. When we stop resisting this pain, when we no longer numb it, avoid it, or plead for someone else to take it away, we begin to realize that it holds information. It reveals the stories we carry about our worth, our fears of being unlovable, and the conditions we place on being accepted. The avoidant partner, by withholding emotional nourishment, becomes a catalyst for inner inquiry. We start to ask ourselves why their absence feels so threatening, why we crave validation from someone who cannot give it freely, and why we stay entangled in a dynamic that slowly erodes our self-esteem. This pain begins to uncover truths we may have kept hidden for years, that we confuse intensity with love, that we feel seen only when we are needed, or that we fear solitude so deeply we accept crumbs just to avoid the silence of being alone. These realizations are not comfortable, but they are necessary. They mark the beginning of wisdom. We are learning from them. Transformation begins the moment we stop waiting for the avoidant to become someone they are not and start becoming who we were always meant to be. The pain shifts from being a weight to being a teacher. We start to ask different questions, ones that don't revolve around how to fix the relationship, but how to reclaim the parts of ourselves we gave away in the name of love. We begin to nurture the spaces within us that have long been abandoned, the parts that needed tenderness, safety, and unconditional presence. In this process, we do not become harder, we become deeper. We stop measuring our value by someone else's capacity to stay. What once felt like heartbreak becomes a kind of rebirth. We start building emotional boundaries, not as walls, but as sacred structures that protect the self we are beginning to respect. We no longer see pain as something to run from, but as a passage through which our true self is born. The wound no longer dictates our choices, it informs them. It sharpens our vision, deepens our empathy, and teaches us discernment. Detaching from the avoidant partner no longer feels like loss, it feels like alignment. The energy we used to pour into being chosen by them is now used to choose ourselves. The pain taught us not just about them, but about what we deserve, what we need, and most importantly, who we are. It was never meant to destroy us. It was meant to awaken us, and in that awakening, wisdom blooms. Emotional detachment from an avoidant partner is not merely a step away from them, it is a profound return to the self. When entangled in such relationships, we often orbit around their silence, their absence, their inconsistency, as though our emotional balance is suspended in their gravitational pull. We lose sight of our own center because we are constantly adjusting ourselves to accommodate their distance. We begin to define our emotional climate by their moods, their texts, their attention or lack thereof. In doing so, we slowly abandon the inner ground of our being. We forget the sound of our own voice, the validity of our own needs, and the wholeness that exists independent of being chosen by another. To return to the self is to reclaim what was always ours, but temporarily misplaced in the pursuit of closeness. This is not a rejection of the avoidant partner, nor is it an act of punishment. It is a decision to stop outsourcing our sense of security, worth, and meaning. The avoidant cannot offer what they themselves fear: deep intimacy, emotional consistency, and vulnerability. Waiting for them to transform into someone capable of meeting us fully becomes a kind of spiritual starvation. We stay hungry while holding out hope that one day they will serve what we've been craving, but their emotional kitchen remains closed. At some point, the soul recognizes that it must feed itself or perish in longing. Returning to the self means listening again, to the quiet intuitions we silenced, to the red flags we justified, to the needs we minimized so as not to be too much. It means acknowledging that we have often betrayed ourselves in the name of preserving the relationship. We tolerated too little, gave too much, and excused what hurt us because we feared what it might mean to walk away. But walking away is not always abandonment. Sometimes it is the highest act of self-respect. It is the declaration that we will no longer trade emotional presence for potential, nor sacrifice our peace at the altar of unreciprocated effort. In this return, the power dynamic changes. The avoidant no longer holds the remote control to our self-worth. Their unpredictability stops being a source of anxiety and becomes a signal of incompatibility. We stop analyzing their every word or silence and begin studying the terrain of our own inner life. What do we love? What do we fear? What are we called to become? This inward gaze reveals a truth that no external relationship can provide. Our wholeness was never dependent on someone else's willingness to stay. When we detach emotionally, we do not become indifferent, we become sovereign. We recognize that love does not require self-abandonment, and connection does not demand the sacrifice of selfhood. We come home to ourselves, not as a consolation prize, but as a profound realization that the self we had been looking for in them was waiting all along within us. In that return, there is peace, not because they changed, but because we did. Emotional detachment from an avoidant partner is not about bitterness, revenge, or shutting down your heart. It is about awakening. It is about recognizing that the very pain you've been trying to escape holds the key to your freedom. Through the projection of your own unmet needs, the compulsive chase for closeness, the overinvestment of energy, and the awakening through pain, you are being invited to confront the shadow and return to the self. This journey is not about changing them. It is about reclaiming you. The avoidant was never your healer. They were your mirror. And once you stop abandoning yourself to be loved by someone else, the cycle ends. You do not lose love. You rediscover it. At its highest form, love rooted in wholeness, truth, and self-respect. In that space, the need to be chosen disappears, because you have already chosen yourself.